You know, my Azreel video's been up for about a day now. Let's go check in and see how it's doing. Just got to grab my phone here. There you are. There you are. Mwah, chef's kiss. What a beauty. All right, let's see. Wow, look at that. 18 subs, 211 views, and growing. Looking pretty good.
Research Pod, can I speak to you for a minute?
What?
You might want to have a look at this.
Hey, look at that. Sully made a community post promoting my video. Wait a minute. Genuine criticism. Nah, this can't be. I would never make a mistake. Fine. I see how it is. Yeah, you think you're better than me, huh, Sully? Well, you know what I'll do? I'll show you a video right now that's gonna make you change your mind completely. Here, watch this.
Okay, Mr. Essay, I say, prepare to be written! I'm doing it! Yeah! Pinch some of these, pinch some of these. Almost there, and done. Now let's see how it looks so far. The break time!
Hey, this part isn't actually scripted. I didn't originally plan to have a new background, and then I thought it'd be funny to go into, I think it was called Scratch.io or something. I just looked up, free, some crappy drawing site online. I thought it'd be funny to just draw up a bunch of stuff and make it my new background. So there's just my amalgamation here, my masterpiece. My Mona Lisa here. This is the new background now for my videos. So, this part's unscripted. I'm not exactly sure how to segue into my script because I was not planning on this. But I'll figure out a way. So let's see here. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I'm the Research Pod and once again we are discussing Deltarune. More specifically, I'm going to be giving my own personal reasonings and opinions on every candidate for one of the biggest and most important mysteries in Deltarune. Who is the Roaring Knight? I'd say it's a pretty important detail, being that they're the main antagonist of the game. The identity of the Knight is easily the single most debated discussion in the entire Deltarune community, with tons of great videos having been made on the topic, all of which I recommend you go and watch after this. One of the best parts in a mystery like this is being able to see the different points of evidence towards everyone's own theories, allowing you to agree or disagree, learning new plot details within the game you may have missed and or forgotten, and forming your own ideas. But what do I, the Great Research Pod, think? Well, we'll get to that. What I want to do in this video is go through a list of every Deltarune character I've picked, look at all the evidence in favor of them being the Knight, and use the process of elimination to get down to who I believe it could be. Also, big spoiler warning for all Deltarune here, so without any further delay, let's just get into this. I think it would probably be a good idea to begin by laying out the basic info that we do know about the Knight, due to the fact that it's not a lot. Here's all we know. We know for certain that 3 dark fountains have been opened in the story thus far. 2 of them, the Card Kingdom in the abandoned school classroom, and the Cyber World in Library's computer lab, aka the 2 dark worlds we've explored thus far, were created by the Knight using the only known weapon of creating one at the moment, by piercing or stabbing the earth with a weapon while coursing its will into its blade. I say 3 fountains because Kris does make the 3rd one in their living room at the end of Chapter 2. We know that they more than likely entered the Card Kingdom Dark World, as is told to us by Sham that the Knight locked away the 3 kings in power and then left, leading King, the character, to put himself and his son Lancer into power. The Cyber World has no evidence at all as to whether the Knight went inside of it or not. However, it is worth noting that a video of the Knight opening a fountain, presumably the Cyber World fountain, is played on loop in a room within Queen's mansion. And lastly, we know that they are a Lightner, obviously. However, their motive and gender are currently unknown. Despite Queen calling them the Roaring Knight, she herself admits she had no idea what the Roaring was up until the end of Chapter 2, so it's up in the air as to if the Knight themselves is aware of what the Roaring is and the danger they are inadvertently causing by opening up fountains and creating these dark worlds. And that's it. That is all we know about the Knight. Everything else is completely speculation. Like I said, not a lot to go off of, but just barely enough where we can reasonably rule out a good chunk of characters. So now we can begin going down the list I've made up of Lightners within Deltarune to try and deduce who I personally believe the Roaring Knight is. Right off the bat, just to save us some boring repetition, I have eliminated various NPCs who serve almost no narrative purpose, other than to fill up hometown. Characters such as Onion-san, Jockington, Temmie, etc. You get it. I have boiled down the list of Lighteners, not counting characters such as Noelle, who clearly aren't the knight, to this. Kris Dreamer, Susie, Azreel Dreamer, Toriel Dreamer, Asgor Dreamer, Papyrus, and Father Alvin. Even though he's not a Lightener, maybe, Gaster's more than worthy of being looked at, so he's here too. Alright, this is where the debunking starts, so let's get into this with Kris. Starting off with the most controversial knight candidate, considering they're the only character we've seen open a fountain and create what will be Chapter 3's Dark World on screen, seen at the end of Chapter 2. Now, a lot of people who play Deltarune in passing and aren't paying super attention to tons of details and lore bits assume Kris is the knight. And, yeah, duh. There's a crazy amount of evidence for it. Both names start with K, Kris opens a dark fountain and has everyday access to the current Dark World locations, and finally their Dark World form is that of, you guessed it, a knight in armor. But let's really look into this for a moment. Deltarune, especially with Kris, is all about a mystery guided by subverting your expectations right under your nose. Kris, at the end of Chapter 1, was intentionally made to appear as though they were being possessed by Undertale's first fallen human and demon child, Kara. At the end of Chapter 1, upon ripping their soul out of their body, which we have used to control them like a puppet as the player, Kris's eyes flash red and they reveal a knife in their hand. This, on top of being dressed like Kara, made it seem that way to everyone. But then Chapter 2 came out, and what does Chapter 2 teach us? That Kris used that knife to simply cut the pie Toriel had baked for them, and that their eyes are just naturally red to begin with, regardless of whether they have the soul inside them or not. If Kris was the knight, then King would recognize them immediately as being the figures who showed up out of nowhere in Card Kingdom, defeated and locked away the 3 previous rulers, and then left without a word. King clearly does not recognize Kris, so this is another huge blow against the argument. And finally, the timeline of the game doesn't add up. If you wanted to support Kris as the knight, then you could argue that Kris opened the Card Kingdom Dark World in the abandoned classroom. Clearly they didn't, but fine. But there's no way to explain how Kris would be able to open the Cyberworld Dark World in the library. We know it was not there between the time we gained control over Kris at the start of Chapter 1, and was still not created by the end post-sealing Card Kingdom's fountain at the end of Chapter 1. So, if Kris created the Cyberworld, they would have had to have done it between the morning they wake up in Chapter 2 and before they and Susie head to the library and discover it. Here's the issue. They couldn't have done that. We are in control of Kris and see them on screen every single second from when they wake up in their house at the start of the chapter to when they arrive with Susie at the library. They didn't have both the time or the physical control over their own body to open it. Also, we know that rooms where dark fountains have been opened turn into black voids as a result of the world being made up of that same room. So you really expect me to believe that Noelle and Berdly left the school, walked into the library, opened the computer lab door, saw that it was just a huge empty black void inside, walked in, sat down on non-existent tables and chairs, set their books down on nothing, and then immediately fell asleep with their hands in their faces? Absolutely no way that happened. And for one final nail in the coffin, Queen states right before the end of Chapter 2 that any Lightener at all with an above average amount of determination can create a fountain. We know this because A, to restate, she says it directly, and B, seconds after stating that, Berdly immediately goes and starts opening a fountain before he is stopped by Ralsei, in which we are told the story of the Roaring. And, for the final nail in the coffin, it makes no sense narratively to reveal the big plot twist of your story the exact same chapter it was introduced in, especially not in the second chapter of a 7-chapter long epic. This is debunked. Kris Dreamer is not the knight. Next up we have Susie. Now look, I know what I said about not picking characters on the list that obviously aren't the knight, but I've seen a very slim amount of people online claim it's her. But this character of anyone else is the most damning as to why they easily aren't the knight. So I'll shut this down for anyone who still believes this. Susie has no idea what the Card Kingdom is when she falls into it with Kris in Chapter 1. Her entire character arc is that due to her less than favorable Lightworld life, she enjoys spending time in the Dark World's fantasy made-up reality setting. getting to do what she wants and make friends finally, allowing her to open up as a person and become more accepting of Kris as someone other than her personal punching bag, becoming a very close friend to Kris, I'll say, and Lancer because of this. Susie is completely ignorant on the prophecy, the roaring, or anything having to do with fountains in the Dark Worlds prior to accidentally falling into the Card Kingdom Dark World with Kris in Chapter 1. And even by the end of Chapter 2, Susie still doesn't fully understand the separation of realities between the light and dark worlds. So no, the Roaring Knight, the creator of the Dark Worlds, is not going to be shocked when they discover a dark world they would have opened anyway, let alone with a blunt, carefree attitude like Susie. For all three people out there who still cling to Susie as the Knight for whatever reason, she's not. And that's why she's the next person on the list to be debunked. This next entry is going to be really short, but here we have Azreel Dreamer. The reason this one is short is because I already have a whole video going in depth on why I wholeheartedly believe that Azreel is the angel of the prophecy. So obviously, if I already think he's playing an even more mysterious role than that of the Knight, I personally have to count him out by default. Go watch that video for me, but Azreel as the Knight is debunked by proxy. Azreel Dreamer as the Knight is a cool idea, I like it a lot. I think the idea of this sweet motherly figure who wouldn't hurt a fly, creating worlds where fantasy become reality, as in making something akin to magical bedtime stories real locations and unknowingly causing an earth-destroying doomsday event, is a very twisted and cool concept. Perhaps she would be doing it to cope with the fact her life is basically miserable? Kris has been acting weird because she doesn't know we the player are possessing them, let alone she's in a video game. Azreel has been off to college for years and is only coming back for a few days, and she divorced her husband Asgor due to some unknown police chief eviction action he took that she despised him for. But I'm really not too sure on this one. I like it, but I'm not even close to believing it. Azreel, as I said, wouldn't hurt a fly. She knows as a teacher that students are going to be near that abandoned classroom, and especially the library computer lab where she knows Kris, her own adopted child, frequents to study. It goes against Azreel's entire character as a sweet motherly teacher who bakes cookies, pies, and frequents her local church, to twist locations occupied by innocent children, and to dangerous portals to alternate realities full of fantasy monsters and beasts. So for me, Azreel is also debunked. However, I am very much with the rest of the community on being extremely curious and excited to see how Azreel will act having been dragged into a dark world made by her own home in Chapter 3. Azreel Dreamer, however, is a fantastic candidate for the identity of the Knight in my opinion. Asgor's role in Undertale was all about how much of a sad and broken man he had become, due to both his actions in and out of his control. Once the beloved king of his people, Asgor, married to Azreel, had his two children, Azreel and the first fallen human, Kara, killed by humans in one night, swearing out of anger and grief that he would kill every human who fell to the underground to use their souls to destroy the barrier and regain life on the surface. This action disgusted Azreel, who divorced him and locked herself away in the ruins, leaving a sad Asgor without his wife or children, forced to fulfill a promise he made to his desperate people, a promise he didn't at all want to commit to. Asgor is also a sad and broken man in Deltarune. Due to some unknown action that led him to being removed as chief of police, Azreel divorced him. With Azreel gone to college, Kris is all Asgor has left, which isn't working out well considering Kris has been turned into an emotionless shell of themselves, thanks to a certain someone, making us, the player, possess them. With the themes of kings and queens in Deltarune's current two Knight-made Dark Worlds paralleling back to Asgor's role as a mighty king in Undertale, the concept of Asgor being the Knight, creating worlds to try and regain some structure in his life once again to make up for his broken family, to me, is a super cool theory, and one I think has a lot of weight to it. After all, with the mystery man giving Kris eggs in the Dark World secret rooms that Kris and Kris only can enter, and then having the Light World locations where you put said eggs be both in the fridge at the back of Asgor's flower shop and in Sans' supermarket, a location in which Asgor speaks to Azreel in a cutscene about plans for Azreel's return home. I think Asgor being the Knight has some good weight to it, so we'll add him to the list of people who I think could have a chance. Papyrus as the Knight is funny, because the very slim evidence for it works against it in favor of another character. There are three big reasons why some people think Papyrus, Sans' brother, will be the Roaring Knight. The first being that despite his house being right next to Sans' shop, we cannot enter it, but can hear him inside. Sans comments on this, saying that we can't meet him yet, but maybe we can when our brother comes home, referring to Azreel as Sans is talking to Kris. With me believing Azreel to be the angel, Sans knowing he's in a video game and has seen us the player before in Undertale, as well as Deltarune memorabilia in his secret workshop in Undertale, and with the idea that Papyrus being the knight, someone who would know about the angel and the angel's heaven, someone who could tell Sans about all this stuff, you'd think I'd be more inclined to believe this idea, but we'll get to that. The second piece of evidence is that in merch, Papyrus can be seen hiding behind the same tree that the mystery Eggman hides behind. But the Eggman clearly isn't the knight. The reason I brought it up for Asgor is because the mystery eggs being placed in locations where he is present is something unique that ties him to the Dark Worlds. This merch is also not canon, so it doesn't matter. Oh, and speaking of Asgor, the final piece of evidence for Papyrus as the knight is the location of his house compared to the school, where the first Dark World was located. Deltarune has themes of chess all over it, and in chess, the movement pattern of the knight is over to left or right and then up. Well, guess what? Contrary to what fans of this idea believe, Papyrus's home is not placed in the knight's movement pattern. There are 3 spaces left of the school, not 2. But look at this. The 2 knight-made Dark Worlds are located within the school and the library. If you go both over 2 spaces from the left from the school and 2 over from the right where the library is and go straight up where they meet, the knight's chess movement exactly, they connect at Flower King, Asgor's shop. So there is why Papyrus is not the knight, and more evidence for why Asgor is. Oh boy, you know I like myself some religious symbolism in my stories. I've been waiting to dig into Alvin. Father Alvin being the knight is another one that is extremely interesting, due to the fact he speaks dialogue that clearly references the act of creating a dark world. For those who don't know, Father Alvin is a brand new minor character to Deltarune. He's the priest of the hometown church worshipping the angel in the game. Alvin has all sorts of ties to the idea of the Dark Worlds and important characters. He knows Kris and Azreel very well because the Dreamers used to frequent the church every Sunday, with him commenting on how Kris and Azreel would only show up to drink the kids' fruit juice at communion. He is noticeably very tall. A line of text remarks that a very tall person could fit inside the abandoned classroom's closet when interacting with it. The location of the first Dark World. This classroom also notably features a drawing of Alvin's father, Gerson, on the wall. A very minute detail that was strangely pointed out by Toby Fox himself on a live stream. In Chapter 2, Alvin can be seen paying respects to Gerson's grave. We know thanks to dialogue from Alvin and a bench built in Gerson's memory that Gerson was a prolific story writer, believing in the beauty of using fiction and writing to blend fantasy and reality. Obviously a huge theme of Deltarune as a game, with the creation of fountains birthing dark worlds, locations that make fantasy come to life. We know that fountains can be created with any weapon, not just knives like Queen shows and Kris uses. Had Ralsei not interrupted Birdly at the end of Chapter 2 to explain the roaring, Birdly, a lightner, was seconds away from accidentally using his halberd to open a second fountain within the library Dark World, so we know multiple weapons can be used. Well, after talking to Alvin at Gerson's grave in Chapter 2, he discusses the beauty of blending fantasy and reality. You overhear Alvin speak to Gerson's grave saying, "Were you proud of me, father?" and "Is it right for this hammer to... ... This very strange line obviously hints at a relation between Alvin and the knight. The only time Lightners using weapons in the light world is shown and talked about is the process of creating dark worlds. Combine this with Alvin knowing the Dreamer family very well, his father Gerson being clearly tied to the game's core theme of fiction and reality blending, Gerson's photo on the wall in the abandoned classroom being pointed out by Toby Fox, and a line about Alvin doing some sort of morally questionable action with a weapon that he seems to wish to consult his father about in continuation of a legacy. Alvin is the only character in the whole game that has this much solid evidence pointing towards him as the knight, and I 100% believe he is an extremely likely candidate. But of course, as most Deltarune theories usually come to him, we have to discuss the man who speaks in hands. Dr. W.D. Gaster. Gaster was the royal scientist in Undertale. He built a large structure for power supply named the Core. However, Dr. Gaster, a genius scientific mastermind, tragically fell into the Core and had his body ripped apart, scattered throughout time and space. Gaster's iconic unknown message reads as follows. Entry number 17. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps on growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? We had no idea what this meant until Deltarune was finally released, in which we were able to link back to a Wingdings post in which Gaster quoted Deltarune's prophecy. Gaster. It's Gaster. Gaster made the prophecy. Gaster in the files is called Hymn. The music that plays in the depths, the location in which Gaster is trapped within in Deltarune, a haunting void, is called another hymn. And it is here where you create a goner version of Kris, a lightener. It's common knowledge and no surprise that WD Gaster is the man who speaks to you in the file select screen and guides you to make the goner at the beginning of Chapter 1. Gaster's role as the god of the Deltarune world, the man pulling the strings to some unknown motive behind the scenes, it's actually one of the very few things in Deltarune's plot we know for a fact. The bunker in the woods of Hometown plays Entry 17's audio. The audio plays again every time you use the phone in the Dark Worlds. Noelle's sister, the infamously missing December holiday, is missing. She became a goner, and it's screaming out searching for help, scared for her life in the game's code. Dialogue that is written in a way that shows it was never meant to be implemented into the game at all. It's intentionally deleted. She's trapped in the depths, just like Gaster. In my personal opinion, the you two that Gaster refers to in Entry 17 is Kris and us, the player. Of course, we won't know until we inevitably meet him in Deltarune after years of lurking. Jumping back to the religious symbolism, I brought up in my Azreel video that Deltarune has a habit of using themes and concepts loosely based on and tied to symbolic representation of religion. The symbolism hierarchy in Deltarune seems to be this: Gaster on the top as God, the man who created everything from nothing, then the roaring night, then the angel who I believe to be Azreel Dreamer, and then us, the player, who's possessing Kris Dreamer. Gaster is not the roaring night. The roaring night has been created and employed by Gaster to carry out actions that will guide us, to guide Kris on their, as the name of the song that plays when sealing the fountains implies, holy crusade to purge the night and banish the angels' heaven, allowing Gaster to step free from his prison in the depths and reveal his true motives. Gaster is not the night. He's God, the creator. And how does the Bible begin? God, Gaster, creates the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The Spirit of God moved upon the face of waters, and he said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God then saw the light was good, and divided the light from darkness. And there we are. Gaster has you make a twisted, goner version of Kris, a lightener. He creates the light, and then seeing that the lighteners are pure and good, separates them from the darkness, the darkners. His face shown on the waters. We're constantly told by Onion Son about an old song of the sea that we will hear below the waves. And what do we hear when Kris falls into the first Dark World? The sounds of waves, an audio file titled ocean.gg. Oh, and as for that song below them, just remember that when you speak into the phone in the Dark Worlds, you hear an all too familiar Entry 17 speaking right back. After all, just like Jevel says, hell's roar bubbles from the depths. You got all that right? So no, Gaster's not the knight. He's way more important than that. Gaster to me is debunked. So that's everyone. In my personal opinion, I think it's a two-way tie between Asgor and Father Alvin. I'm leaning more towards Alvin though. It's also just as likely to be a completely brand new character, but that feels like a cop-out answer for this video, so I'll say I lean towards Father Alvin being the roaring knight. So, what do you guys think? Do you agree with me that the candidates so far, Father Alvin is most likely to be the roaring knight? Or are there other characters I possibly didn't mention that you think I have a chance? I'd love to hear your take. The knight is hands down my favorite mystery in Deltarune, so I love seeing what other people say to theorize about him. Before I head out here, I want to say thank you all for watching. My subs are growing, my views are getting pretty high. I just do this for fun because I like talking about Deltarune, and I like to get my ideas out there. But I still appreciate it a lot. I also want to thank Sully for shouting me out in a community post like that. I'm sure that's where a majority of the views came from. But yeah, with that all being said, thank you for watching, like, sub, and I'll see you guys next time.